Hello friends, and welcome to the Hanged Man in the Moon. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm pleased to meet you. If you've been here before, thank you for returning. I'm truly honored. And friends, I am even more honored this week because I have a wonderful treat for you. I have my first ever interview with a scholar, a brilliant woman in the Tarot community called Christine Payne-Towler. Now, Christine has been a prolific author as well as a creator of tarot decks. One of the first books that she wrote was The Underground Stream Esoteric Tarot Revisited. Another book that she wrote accompanied a very popular tarot deck called The Tarot of the Holy Light. And there are two companion books to that tarot. One that is based on understanding the deck itself, and one which is focused more on the esoterica behind the deck, around the deck. So I have this interview for you, and it is split into three parts. The first part is basically Christine's introduction and who she is and her concept of tarot, and especially continental tarot. The second part is focused mostly on the deck, and the third part is going to be focused on using the deck, how a newbie to the Tarot of the Holy Light might enter into its world. So friends, without further ado, let's jump into the first part of the video. So I'd like to start by saying thank you very much for being so gracious and generous to re-record this interview, which unfortunately has been lost to the universe. The interview that we had originally recorded, I was very sad to have lost because it felt like being in a masterclass, which was absolutely breath of fresh air for me, and very, very informative. And I know that this will be equally magnificent. So again, thank you very much for your patience and generosity. Christine, would you be willing to give us another introduction of yourself? Tell us about your beginnings, your backstory.
Sure. I do have a really interesting backstory, not because of me personally, but because of the times and place in which it all took place.
Right.
I was born into the Berkeley Bay area and graduated high school in 1970. So I wasn't living in San Francisco, but I was right over the hill from Berkeley, and there was just such a cultural ferment going on there that there was no way to miss it. So even if I was just a little dweeblet feeling my way through, high school, there still was this mass phenomenon going on in the collective consciousness, and I clearly got swept away. The summer before college, so this is a graduated spring of 1970. I hung around with my family for the summer, and then I went off to college in fall. And that summer, I took a course in psychic development.
Ooh.
And it was just 2 weekends. I think it was 2 weekends. But it was called Mind Dynamics. A few people might remember that from the good old days. Basically, what they had done is gone backwards through all the esoteric literature of the past and scraped out all these exercises without giving any context. So they just found self-development techniques that were scattered through I tripped over them later in different places and realized, this is where they got that.
Yeah.
But they weren't teaching any dogma at all. They were just saying, let's do this. Tell us what happens. Now we're going to do that. Let's see what that did for you.
Sure.
And what it did for me was unlock all these, what must have been past life initiations, because suddenly all kinds of psychic experiences just started coming and getting me. Now, I had been having little stuff all my life, but I just and I've been checking with other people to see whether they had those same experiences as I do.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them had told me no. So I kind of knew I was off into some kind of territory that wasn't common, because I had a lot of trouble getting, checking my experiences against other people's and not having a match. So, but it all these things came into focus and stopped being so arbitrary and irrational once these exercises happened.
Okay.
And so that set me up to go to college with this thing under my belt, which for the first time I could manage rather than just being pummeled by.
Right.
So then that Christmas, I was looking for Christmas presents in the used bookstore in Salem, Oregon, where I was going to college.
Right.
And I ran across what I think must have been the library of a Mason who had, there was 3 or 4 books on Tarot: Pappas, C.C. Zane, Eliphas Levi, Moni Sadhu. I still have those books because they changed my life. Now, at that time, I bought, the only tarot deck in the store was this silly little game deck from a company called Score More.
Okay.
It was this silly black and white, abstractish, sort of least possible effort set of 78 cards.
Wow.
But when I went back to the dorm, one of my friends said, well, I know what these are.
Oh, okay.
These are tarot cards. So I'll shuffle them and we'll put them out in the past. So we did that, and the instructions with the deck were shuffle the cards really well, throw them out 1 card per position, and then make up a reason why the card fell in that position.
Okay.
Those are all the instructions the first instructions I ever learned about tarot. Make up a reason. And to this day, I'm still doing the same thing, because that's all we ever do.
Right.
You can get much deeper into the content of the cards.
Mm-hmm.
You can design your own spreads. You can get all esoteric, geometric, and all that kind of stuff. But basically, at the end, you still have to figure out why this card fell in this position for this person. So I had to learn early on that combination of reasoning and intuition, especially because when I finally went looking for a real tarot deck, I got the deck that goes with the C.C. Zane book. So I got that black and white Egyptian deck from called the Sacred Tarot. And that is very conscientiously astronomical.
Okay.
And it's so right off the bat, I'm being shown all the elements that exist in the substructure of tarot, because every card has planets and signs and degrees and energies, and it's quite systematically denominated, and you can actually see how they're doing it, because they're not trying to cover it up at all. They're teaching, their teaching book that goes with it. They're going very cleanly through it. So I learned tarot as if it were a computer, as if it were an astronomical computer. And that was my very first exposure. So while I was in college, I didn't really have that many people to talk to about it, or at least those first few years.
Did you read?
But then when I got back, as soon as I got back to the dorm, people were saying, well, wouldn't that be fun? Let's try it. Anybody who had experience with tarot was thrilled that there was a tarot deck in the building. Okay. So it was a way to meet people. But I let people know I have no idea what I'm doing. But I could see from Moni Sadhu and from Levi that this is a psychological tool. And my parents were psychotherapists, and criminologists, working inside the correction system in the Bay Area. So, very deeply involved in where do people get their motives and why do they do what they do, and how much of it comes from family contribution or social contribution versus the individual character. So those kind of categories were already in my head just from living at my family's home. So I could see that tarot is an esoteric tool for self-development and motivation and self-healing psychologically and spiritually. So, and I'm a mystical type of person. I eventually found a program in the Bay Area studying mysticism and parapsychology. So I finished my college career there, and therefore I have some very rare and wonderful credits that make many academics get all excited, because these programs started in the 70s and then got shut down due to lack of interest. And they didn't start again they started again under a new flag in Europe as the discipline of Gnosis and Western esotericism.
Okay.
So what I studied as mysticism and parapsychology in the, when was that? I guess that was the late 70s, had to die and then be reborn in the year 2000 and forward over in Europe in order to really get an academic foothold. Before that time, when I was in college, it just wasn't taken seriously enough. And that's why, they were very wonderful scholars. It was a great program. I have the equivalent of a master's degree, but they never certified that school. That school had to go backwards and become a psychotherapy school. So that's the John F. Kennedy University of Technology in California. I guess they moved south after they outgrew the first campus. So to get accredited, they had to give up the mysticism and parapsychology. So I really have this very scarce education that only happened for a short period of time and went underground, and became a collector of esoteric books from everywhere just to keep schools were interested. So you can't see it from here, but I am surrounded by bookshelves. I have 11 bookshelves of things that I've collected since that time. And since the year 2000, I've been able to get my hands on a goodly collection of esoteric academics. So people who have waded back in under the new program and really done scholarly work in this vein. So
how much of that is in English?
Well, the departments first started in France, so there's a lot of it that is in European languages, but the American audience is huge, so many things get translated into English. Luckily, So we're if they didn't if they weren't pitching to American students, I don't know that they would have taken hold as well in Europe, because the academic settings really fought against people coming in who were actually interested in or gifted in metaphysics and parapsychology and psychic development. They actively resisted it, and they didn't want to make this a topic. So it's been a long fight to bring it to the place where they could endow a chair at the Sorbonne and begin to, stabilize the academic canon and build up course material. And now it's in a wonderful situation, but this is 20 years later yet again.
Which is funny, because when we think of universities, we remember that the origins of academic studies, the queen of all sciences was theology, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And then now it's like, no, none of that.
Well, certainly the theologians have been very jealous of their field. They have not wanted to allow ordinary people in. So you had, they would carefully winnow out anybody who would be the least bit creative, or anybody who was the least bit innovative, so that they could find the people who with the anxiety disorders that would keep them right down to a single letter at a time kind of thing, rather than, making sure they were great scribes and copyists, but not great thinkers. This is one of the problems with priesthoods. Certainly the Temple University is where it all started, but once you get a closed group up at the top, then they'll just make sure that nobody but their own kind can get in. So, and then we've had our orgies of witch burning and cultural crisis over and over, attacking the the psychics and the healers, because the church didn't want to admit that they couldn't do the healing themselves and things like that. plague times where we need a scapegoat, so we hang all the women and stuff like
The divine
that.
only
So,
works through me, not you.
yeah, yes. So, see, tarot and astrology are both ways that an ordinary person, or a person who was born at an ordinary level of society, can find their way in if
Right.
they can make the associations. And so it's a big game of correspondences. If you're just stuck with, what's on the surface of the cards or what's in one historical astronomy book, you're going to be able, but you'll be able within a smaller ambit. Your lens will still be only have one magnification. You'll only be, like what they say, if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
So
Right.
we have had to literally evolve our understanding and diminish our making war on the other before we could open up to the great sunflower of esotericisms, plural.
Ooh,
And
nice.
start connecting the dots between disparate traditions. One of the ways that the academics kept Western esotericism out of the academic canon was to say, well, it's an orphan, it has no roots, it has no continuity, you just find all these broken pieces rattling around, nobody knows how to put them together. And that was what I decided to refute, because I am a person who is self-trained, and I did have to just rumble through all the intellectual and find the piece. Would have held off if they could, because I came up saturated with the practice since I, got my initiation to it in 1970 before I even got to college. So there was no way to separate the practitioner from the intellect.
Okay.
So, and then I'm wired in a certain way where my two sides of my brain didn't completely come together well. So I do have a vast intuitive side that is hand in hand, but not entirely integrated with my intellectual side. So I have the experience inside myself of blinking back and forth between everything being transparent and connected, and then wanting to get mind around it in a logical and linear fashion. And so in the end, I centered on the mathematics of astronomy, the mathematics of number theology, because numbers don't lie and they don't change in translation.
Right.
And the part of me that was trying to get down to brass tacks had to find something that wasn't mutating over time and when it crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries. And that's the number aspect of it all, and the astronomical aspect of it all. In the end, and it took me a long time to realize, the Western worldview is very strongly dominated by the black and white chessboard of either or. So that's the Aristotelian worldview, that you sees everything in paired opposites and builds up a reality on the square. Whereas Middle Eastern and Far Eastern esotericism is more deeply rooted in the sexagesimal grid, the sexagesimal mathematics of astrology. And that's, it's 6 times 10, or it's base 12, or however you do it, however you want to think of it. It's the honeycomb grid instead of the square grid that's just rows and columns. So the honeycomb grid has 6 sides and everything expands like a sunflower. And the mathematics of the sexagesimal grid is so pure and beautiful that it does not create fractions. You can expand or contract, you can work on different scales, and it always works out cleanly. So that's what you need to have when you are attempting to link up motion in space with duration in time. So, when you're studying cycles, which come back around and yet corkscrew forward, you have to have a model that allows you to move without leaving it. that allows everything to wrap back around and converge upon itself, and that expresses the curve as well as the straight line. So
how does that work with tarot? I mean, how does that integrate into, for example, an understanding of the cards that we use?
Well, first you start with the equation that the tarot is built with. Okay. So in the major arcana, you have 3 times 7 plus 1.
Right.
Okay. So you can either look at that 3 times 7 and say, where did that come from? Or you can look at the 22 and say that, where did that come from? Well, the 22 is the ancient sacred alphabet, which we view as Hebrew, but it's spread all over the world. I mean, Hebrew is the one, the Hebrew alphabet, which is also the Arabic alphabet, is the one that is exactly different linguistic group, has added letters or punctuation marks or some other kinds of sigils to stand for their own noises they make in their language that nobody else does. But the 22 are the baseline consonants required to express most of the sounds in any language in the world. That's how come the alphabet has spread everywhere, even to cultures that were not alphabetic to begin with, because it's so helpful to have these little sound units that you can, make up words and make up sentences with, even if you're speaking a completely different language than Hebrew or Greek or Latin or any of the old ones. These letters, because they're sonic rather than symbolic, they represent frequencies, and those frequencies as colors on the color wheel, or show up as movements, different rates of movement around the wheel of the zodiac. And so again, these things are fractal, they scale in and out of each other, so the paradigm does not break when you move it from the mathematics of astronomy into the mathematics of sound, into the mathematics of color. And this is the substance of the mysteries, is that there is a model in which all of reality can fit if you can work with this. And so this was this is the property of the priesthoods, the astronomical priesthoods from the earliest times. As soon as somebody's building a henge or a temple or a mosque, you are literally sighting the front door to face the sunrise, or you're putting the windows so that the light of certain astronomical events will come and land on the altar on a certain holy day. I mean, it's all structured by this very same mathematics and this very same dynamic, this understanding of movement as time and time as movement. So you can see which priesthoods had possession of this, because you can see from the siting of their temples and the construction of their precincts that these buildings are astronomical observatories.
Yes.
And it's all just right there as soon as you know what you're looking for. But this is what has saved me a lot of trouble in my esoteric work, is using certain criteria to find out whether what I'm studying, whether these people understood the sexagesimal grid or not. And so that has saved me years of time going through different presentations so that I could get down to the ones where I could see the people understood what they're dealing with in the alphabet. So the trumps are the 22 letters of the alphabet, and inside the alphabet are the 12 signs, the 7 traditional planets, and the 3 trans-material elements, so air, fire, water. So those values determine the meanings of the trumps, and the numbers then determine where the letters go, and those letters are ephemeris widgets that then relate to the signs and planets. So the alphabet is simultaneously a number system, a letter system, and an astrological system all at one time. You cannot break them apart without wrecking the system, and it stops working, and if you don't do it right.
And there have been people who have broken it apart and gotten themselves into a little bit of a knot, right?
Right. The 20th century tarots have, to a large degree, left behind the European model of 500 years before the 20th century. They wanted something of their own. They wanted to be seen as creative, breaking the model and whatever. So they threw a rock through the rose window and then gathered up, patched it back together and said, see, look at that. That's our art.
Yes.
So, I don't mean to be fractious, and I've certainly spent enough time fighting about these things. But at this point, I think that academic proofs are thick enough to where it's really not possible anymore for people to say, oh, you just don't know enough. That's why you don't understand the Golden Dawn system.
Yes.
I will say, yes, I know plenty, and that's why I don't use the Golden Dawn system. So, but I already paid those dues in the public sense of having to argue in public. So I'm happy to just take my stand, share what I have. I started teaching tarot about 10 years later after I'd collected all the either books in print or the literal reproductions of the decks, so that I could get a good grasp on the historical decks. I'm not a big collector of modern decks, but I have all the historical ones. And wonderful. I have also, worked out the values that each of these different systems have used as their backbone system. So as you were starting to say, what is the values that you find from in the tarot? I already said the trumps are the signs, planets, and elements taken from are the personalities of the zodiac plus the 4 angles. So ascendant, descendant, nadir, and midheaven. Then the minors are the numbers 1 through 10 in the 4 directions or in the 4 elements. So you basically have a cosmos coming down through the trumps representing the divine cycle or sequence of creation. Then you have the human element in the royals of us as people interacting with those values. Then you have the 40 minors that are like the 4 rivers out of Eden going in the 4 directions that show you how the numbers develop in Earth, how the elements go from their first movement to their second movement to the third movement outwards through the 4 directions or the 4 suits. So this gives you, it's a 4 worlds model, obviously. Earth, and then above it water, and above it air, and above it fire. So this takes in then the realm of the immortals up in the trumps, the realm of the mortals amongst the royals, and then the realm of nature and natural law in the minors. And so I followed that model. The first time I ever saw that laid out so cleanly was the Picard tarot. I ran into information about that years before I could ever get my hands on any of it. And when we finally did, let's see, he had his plates cut to print 50 copies of his deck in black and white in 1907 or something. And he printed 50 copies, and he hoped to live long enough to color them all, but I think he only got a few, maybe up to 10 colored, and then he died. And those decks kind of disappeared, and the plates disappeared. And in 2012, somebody, a woman in France, found them, the plates, the printed plate, at a garage sale or some kind of come and get whatever you want sort of, because nobody understood what they were. She recognized them and took them and made a second printing of 50 black and white copies through the French Ministry of Culture. It's actually in the book. If I'm misspeaking myself, you'll find it's in the book that's just coming out very soon about the Picard tarot.
Which book is this?
Where is it? Right here. This is the book I'm just finishing. Picard tarot. Yes, my husband Michael took one of the copies of the black and whites
Uh-huh.
and colored it. So this is all the cards and my essay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend the whole time, but soon I'm sure there'll be plenty of videos of people. There are a few videos of people going through the Picard deck now, but people don't really understand what it is. The thing that he did that was very unique and different was he's part of the early stages of the surrealistic movement, and he wanted to show part of this interior substructure. So he literally took all the human faces off the minor arcana and made them just strictly elemental developments 1 through 10, following with the geometry of the numbers. Then what he did with the royals was extra hard to figure out, because he actually deconstructed the zodiac, put it back together according to an Arabic cosmological esoteric model, where he has all 3 of each suit wrapped around the 4 angles. So instead of the air sign, triangulating out throughout the zodiac, 3 of them around the zodiac, they're all clustered around one angle. Fire's all clustered around another, water are clustered around another. So it goes back to an Arabic worldview of the creation, that in paradise, it's always spring. So they took the first 4 signs, the first 4 signs of the year, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and put them on the angles. And the next 4, they put to the left of each sign as the sinister side, where you have to build caution and worry about things going wrong. And so those cards counsel for a little bit of paranoia, and let's get down to the details, be sure we got it right. Then the final sequence goes to the right side. They become the Dexter counselors of that element, and they talk about what could be good about it, where the potentials will open, new chances. So you have both a right hand and left hand ally for each of the 4 elements on the 4 points of the year. So it's just a different way of arranging the same thing. This is what we don't understand. You don't have to try and invent a new worldview. There are lots of ways to put how you might want to place the signs on the royals. You just have to put the signs on the royals. They're the personality cards. And in the same way, there's all kinds of ways to denominate the 1 through 10 of the 4 suits, but you have to respect the numbers 1 through 10. They add meaning. This is what everybody's forgotten. We've done books and books on symbolism, books and books on personalities, books and books on magical uses, but the respect of the numbers has been lost, because people don't want to get into sacred geometry and numerical theology and all that. They think it's old and silly, and we don't do that anymore. So that's why we lose track.
Which is what got me frustrated, actually, about a year or 2 ago, when I was, I've had enough of discussion of the majors, and I want to really get down into the minors and figure out what's going on here. What's a really in-depth discussion of that? And the resources for that are so few and far between. Everybody's on the majors bandwagon, and when we get to the minors, it's there's that part over there, then we use it, it's important.
Right. Yeah, and it's partially because the teachers themselves have not put the time into it. And remember, because the numbers pre-exist the astrology and the letters, the numbers are the thing upon which the letters in the astrology is hung. You can't break the system and remold it however you want if you teach your students number theology. Once they learn that, then they understand, you can't substitute a 0 for a 1. You can't shift the letters on the trumps and have that work, because they're for one thing, there was no 0. And there is no letter for 0 in the Hebrew alphabet or any sacred alphabet. So already dragging the fool forward and giving him letter number 1 breaks the whole system.
Yeah.
And so that's another one of those things that as soon as I see, oh, this deck puts A on the 0, well, then that's a deck I don't have to take seriously.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about. It's not, doesn't enter my world. So that has saved me, like I said, tons of trouble, but it's gotten me in all kinds of trouble other ways because people get offended.
Right. Because they're used to one thing.
And they think you're telling them they're wrong.
Right.
Which, they're not right for what they're doing, and they're not wrong for what they're doing, but they're not observing the full body of correspondences. So if you're going to be a teacher of correspondences and then you're going to skip that step, then there's just going to be like a tooth missing in your grill. It's just one of those things. Just because not that many people do it doesn't mean it isn't real.
Right. Yeah. So when is your book? I don't think we mentioned this yet, but when is your book about the Picard deck going to be coming out? You're expecting it out in a couple of weeks, you're saying, I think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say in a couple of weeks. I mean, what I showed you was our proof copy, and we're right now in the midst of fixing the last few things. And then once it's out, because this is self-publishing, so as soon as I tell Amazon to advertise it, then boom, the whole world can buy it.
All right.
So by the time people are,
I've got your deck, so I'm really looking forward to getting the book that's going to be coming out for it.
Yes, you'll be very happy to see it.
Yes.
And the person I worked it with, Dubravka Bensic, was really excellent in making it look good and hold together well. And we went from a kind of an approximate thought form to a really sharp, clean, nice little book under her help. So I really appreciate her. And it's the product of Nine of Coins product. I have been instructed by the Tarot to deliver and build a press that operates according to the Yin model of working. So it's really fun to, all my books are self-published. I started out having to hand over my piles of chapters and pictures to very nice and wonderful men who helped me a lot, but basically told me what to do.
Yeah.
And I, from the beginning, my writings have been somewhat off the reservation of the average Tarot person. And so there was always this tension between what I knew the book had to be and what somebody who's got more experience tells me it has to be for the market, for the moment. And see, I'm not writing for the moment, and I'm not writing for the market, because the market is still hung up on the phenomena of the 90s, of the 1900s. And either that or people are racing to do something totally unique, as if they could reinvent the wheel and make it better. Yeah. So there's, that's a lot of energy I don't have to spend. Let all those people do those donuts and have that good time. I'm talking about the archetypal Tarot. So again, 3 times 7 plus 1 for the trumps, 12 plus 4 for the royals, and 4 times 10 for the minors. And that's the outline of Tarot. That's what ties it to the Astro alphanumeric system. That's the structure that makes it Tarot. You deviate from that, you leave Tarot behind. And there are decks that have more cards and less cards and borrow some parts and free associate on other parts. But, I'm interested in this extremely stable mathematical structure that is the Tarot equation, because that speaks volume of where Tarot is supposed to be. And like I said, you can move the values around inside your different categories. If you want to debate where the planets go amongst the 7 planetary letters, or if you want to denominate the 3 elemental level letters as modern outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, okay, but don't break the model. There are in the alphabet, sacred alphabet, there are planetary letters, there are letters for the signs, there are letters for the elements. You don't break that. That's, the matrix explodes when you do that. It won't work. Because I'm an astrologer as well, just became evident to me that the only way to test a thing like this is to bring it to reality and see if it breaks down under use. So this is where I finally figured out the best way to pick a deck for people is to spell out their cards onto their birth chart.
Okay.
You know, so I did many consultations with people. They would come to me with, I want this deck, or I have these 3 decks, but they don't agree. And how do I know which one I should use? That kind of thing. So we would sit down and I could show them how this deck talks about you in this way. This deck over here talks about you in that way. So which of these do you want to have talking to you about yourself? You know, it's not my job to tell somebody what deck they should use, but I can certainly show them the consequences of one versus another, because it's going to explain their chart to them differently.
Yes. What kind of conversation do you want to have? Right.
Yeah. And because each deck does have the spin that its creator imparted, you can't get around it. So, you know, let's accept the fact that they each have a bias, they each have an attitude, they each come from a certain area and they're going towards, you know, a certain goal, and find the deck that will service you best for what your goals are and for who you think you are. Now, it's also true that people might move from one system to another as they themselves evolve. Yeah. And it's also true that it's, there are just so many English decks out in the market that almost everybody will start with, you know, at least in phase, some version of that, or deck, or a Paul Foster case, or even them say to get Golden Dawn correspondences projected onto them, even though they have nothing to do with the Golden Dawn and existed for 500 years before Golden Dawn ever showed up. But in the marketplace, you know, 7 out of 10 of every book is written to explicate the Golden Dawn system. So you can't, there's no wiping it away. It's at the doorway for many people. But I just, you know, and I've heard so many people say to me, oh, darn, I wish I hadn't learned this other way first. You know, because you do, there's this huge amount of investment people make to try and take all this stuff on and juggle it all and make it make sense to themselves. So I have lost some students who just aren't ready to make the conversion. But I figure if you're not, then it's because that part of this oracle isn't relevant to you. I mean, there's been this whole psychodynamic thing that's grown up on the surface of Tarot in the Jungian angle, that instead of reading the cards systematically like they're a computer, you're riffing off of them, basically reading what comes out of yourself when you look at them. And I think that, you know, there are some people who are extremely gifted with this, but unfortunately it adds to the temptation to be reading yourself onto the cards all the time.
Yes.
Right. And you're not learning the meaning grid that gives them their identities to begin with. And therefore you're just basically free associating if you don't bother to nail it down. And, you know, I went for a long time with it all sort of floating around my head without, I mean, even after in the mid 80s, I made a chart that would correlate major arcana values according to their numbered letter associations. And that helped me sort out which decks took themselves seriously and had a functioning system versus ones that were just throwing symbolism onto the cards willy-nilly as they pleased.
Did that chart that also helped me or develop?
Yes, most recently, it's in all my books. It's in every one of my books, but it's also in Susan Chang's recent book on Tarot correspondences. It's, she you know, she got that commission to put together this book on correspondences, and she approached me and said, can I put your chapter in the appendix? And I said, well, yes, of course. Yeah, do it. Nice of you. And her editors made her put it in the first chapter because it's the historical model of what everybody, you know, what people have been creating these esoteric books, decks to represent. So she's going to talk about correspondences. You kind of have to have my chart there. And it's been vetted massively by this time. And so there's nobody who can refute it because it's just historical. These are what the alphabets do, and this is how they appeared on the cards, and you can find this out for yourself.
I also remember you saying something about a website that you helped develop the information for.
Oh, yeah. At the end of the 90s, when I was writing my first book, The Underground Stream, I was approached by an entrepreneur in Portland who wanted to make a CD-ROM for people's computers that would do tarot interpretation for them. So,
yeah.
in the very old days. And he couldn't really get anybody to do it. He approached a number of people, and they all wanted $1 million right up front, because I mean, it's the size of a phone book. In the amount of writing that was done, because I had to have every card in every position of a number of spreads, and there had to be a separate unique meaning module for each of them, and then I had to decide the entry and how to get out of each card and how to hook them together. I mean, it's a giant it's a giant kaleidoscope of 1 million little chips that then assemble themselves for a given reading, and then fall apart into, and get reassemble for a different reading. So I literally had to turn my brain into the computer that a tarot is, and then write into every little possible pocket something to be said as you carry the client through from this position to this position, from this idea to this idea. And I received a tremendous amount of resistance while I was doing it from people who told me, number one, it's not possible. Number two, you can't duplicate the experience of having a live tarot reader right there with you. Number three, tarot isn't even that organized. Why would you work it like that? You know? So I heard from a lot of people how it was possible, but I just chugged along and did it anyway. Instantly, a bunch of people reverse engineered it and wrote their own. So the way I did it, that was representative of how my mind works my way through a tarot spread. Actually, it was very accessible for other people. They could understand it as soon as they saw it. Wonderful. Now, within a couple years, the owner of this program realized that he was putting himself out of business by letting people take the CD home and put it on their private computer. So he stopped selling CDs, and he put it up at the legacy website, tarot.com. Okay. So it's been running since 2001 at the website tarot.com. And it now has new owners, a lovely woman from Japan who's very respectful of the esoteric paradigm, and therefore has kept it going all this time. But when people say you can't make any money in tarot, it's like, I'm sorry, guys, that has supported me for 20 years. You can make money in tarot, but you have to use it for what it is. It is not something that you just make up something brand new every time. Right. I mean, you may have to make up a reason why this card fell in this position, but you're not digging the Suez Canal every time for a new client. Yes. The cards have meanings. And when you learn how to make the equation, this card in this position and this question, then you can, and that, because that was part of the deal, there had to be a cluster of different kinds of questions that they could answer. So I had to envision all the possibilities. If I hadn't already had 20 years of experience, I wouldn't have been able to see it that way. But this was my proof that tarot is a computer. Right. I got you.
Wasn't that a wonderful beginning to the interview? It's so rich and full of knowledge and wisdom. And every time I speak with Christine, I feel like I've entered into a masterclass. I get so much out of every one of our conversations. And friends, part 2 and 3 of this video will be coming up very soon. So be sure to stay tuned for those. And friends, hit the like button if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed, and hit the alarm bell so you get notifications of when I upload videos, especially parts 2 and 3 of this one. And comment below. What do you think? What do you think of what Christine said? What did you learn from her? I know I've learned quite a lot. I'd love to hear from you. And also, Friends, as always, I wish you love, joy, well-being, and pure awareness. Thank you.